to introduce Ksenia. I'm very excited to introduce Ksenia Luki. Ksenia is a wonderful singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, sound healing practitioner, and a friend. We first met, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, at a ayahuasca ceremony, and it was my first one with this particular group, and it was a perfect person to meet at that time, as you'll find out. You guys are in for a treat with Ksenia. So she began singing when she was 6 years old. She was writing songs on her guitar and performing at local festivals by the time she was 13. Her music is also on all the major platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Bandcamp, and others. And she has thousands of listeners in 100 countries. Her songs weave together all the aspects of her life and heritage by blending mantras, ikaros, prayers, and Russian folk music for a truly unique and inspiring sound. So please welcome Ksenia.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Paul, for such an awesome introduction.
My pleasure.
Hello everyone, my name is Ksenia. It's so nice to see all of you after such a long break, seeing community doing its thing. So, hi you guys! The song is called Atman. It's an old one, so always fun to sing it. Talk to a spirit, she comes in my dreams, she teaches me lessons, and boy does she sing. Her voice sways like a hummingbird, flies like a shooting star. She whispers, you were never born, so you will never die. Every step of the way, remember that you are an infinite soul. Atman. She sheds a light on my darkest corners, merges shadows with pure bliss, and I sway like a hummingbird, fly like a shooting star, knowing I was never born, so I will never die. The future and the past are two sides of one river, and I am in the middle. I am a woman on a journey, a human, changing and transforming a mirror, and their reflection enchanted by the divine perfection chaos. I'm not sure it exists, I hear peace to peace cosmic harmonies. I move freely on earth that's kissed by the sun as I'm walking the path of the soul. Atman, Atman. sways like a hummingbird, flies like a shooting star. She whispers, you were never born, so you will never die. Every step of the way, remember that you are an infinite soul, like the mind. So the next song is called Ho'oponopono. Let's not count mistakes.
Jay's particularly interested in the varying promises and perils of different sacred medicines, as well as the important issues of set and setting, lineage, and cultural misappropriation. With Ryan Westrum, he is the author of the Psychedelics Integration Handbook.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Psychedelia. Thank you, Ksenia. Where are you? There you are. So touched by your music. And actually, the Ho'oponopono, one of the most beautiful psychedelic groups I was in, that very similar to what you were singing, was a chant that we did in the medicine, and it really brought that back to me. And there happened to be a fire outside, and so the whole thing. But your music just conjures up the healing space of the medicine, which is more than I'm going to be able to do by talking to people. But it's such a pleasure and honor to be here. We have can we project that?
We're trying to.
Okay. Well, you'll find, I'm going to have a PowerPoint that will help me talk through what I'm going to say. But I would love it if we made this interactive. I have a presentation I'll talk, but I just have the sense that there's so much wisdom in the room about psychedelics, about integration. I'd love to have your questions, have your dialogue. So please, raise your hand or call out whatever feels right. And thanks, Paul, for mentioning the definition of integration that Paul has and this group has is perfect to me. And the way that I hold integration really is very broad, almost more like process, which we talk about in psychology, but basically integrating everything that's around us, everything that is pulled into our experience with psychedelics. And as you know, psychedelics can take us into so many places through the inside. And so that's kind of the perspective that I'll have. I also want to honor and bring in my co-author, Ryan Westrum. He's a great guy. He and I met at Sophia University and through Groff Legacy, through the Groff Breathwork training, and this book kind of came together out of our friendship. So let's see if we can get the. If you press slideshow up at the top, and then play from start over at the top left. Can you click on play from?
We're trying to find our PowerPoint.
Okay, sorry. Well, while that's happening, I did have a picture of some Ukrainians, and I did want to. There we go. Thank you. So, as Paul suggested, we're living in a time and place that's troubled. Personally, I think that psychedelics are here to help us at a very precarious time in our history. If you go to the next one, the news is full, of course, of the suffering in the Ukraine. One thing that I notice is that there seems to be suffering and violence all over the world, pretty regularly, and I'm glad and relieved that the situation in Ukraine is getting so much attention, and yet I also want to remember the people, many of them who aren't European, who have suffered and been in war for decades. So I'm hopeful that with the attention we're having now to war, that we'll have a way to bring forward shadow that's always been here and begin to heal it. And psychedelics, I feel, are here now to help us move into the spaces where we can look at human history and integrate it and move forward. So that was supposed to be the last slide, but we'll get back to it. Go past that one, please. There we go. So I didn't realize that Paul was going to do that beautiful meditation, so I was going to invite a brief checking in with our breath, and this was the slide just to orient us as to where we are in the universe. And so maybe just invite you to close your eyes just for a second and one or two deep breaths. And this universal space is a space that I know from psychedelics, and perhaps many of you do as well. And just check in with the vastness of the external space that we inhabit, which is matched by the vastness of the internal space. And then a couple of other early points. I have my own caveats in case Big Brother or Big Sister is listening. I'm not. I don't carry psychedelics. I don't market them. I don't sell them, and I don't encourage anyone to do anything that's illegal. And I'll probably see you in a circle someday. So. But sometimes we have to say that. So start out a little bit more about me. Paul gave you some background. Let's go to the. There we go. So I have worked as a lawyer most of my life. I grew up in New Orleans, came to California for college and law school in the 70s and 80s. And then in the mid-90s, and I'll tell the story in a little bit more depth in a moment, but I began to have spiritual experiences, what would be called spiritual emergency in Stan Grof's lingo, and I'll talk about Stan in a moment as well. But as a result of what was happening to me, which was very destabilizing, I thought I needed to find a way to carry it forward, to contain it, and basically to integrate it. So I went to grad school in Palo Alto in transpersonal psychology, and then one thing led to another over the years, including my friendship and assistance to Stan and Brigitte Grof in developing what's called Grof the Legacy Project, which is dedicated to preserving Stan's work and to developing training programs and non-ordinary state experiences in Stan's lineage. So that's what I do now. We have a couple of workshops coming up in late spring in New Mexico and Kansas City in what we call Grof Breathwork, which is a brand of holotropic breathwork that Stan and his late wife Christina created back in the 80s. So I'll say a little bit more later too, but breathwork is a really wonderful means to continue integration of psychedelic experiences, particularly for what might be the tougher experiences that might linger somewhere in our body, mind, spirit, particularly the energetic body, and breathwork can help bring some closure, some healing to those experiences. So this is Stan, and because I'll mention Stan a number of times talking today, I just wanted to give you a sense of him, and I'd love to talk more about Stan at later events if anyone's interested. Who's heard of Stan or had read? Okay, so I'm speaking to folks who know. So I have the great privilege, every time I talk to Stan and his wife Brigitte, I wonder how I managed to get in a situation where I know Stan well, and he thanks me for my efforts, and he really means it. And he is, in my mind, in terms of depth psychology, it's Freud, Jung, Grof, and we can say more about that over time. But as most of you know, Stan was one of the original investigators of LSD back in the 50s and 60s. He's Czech originally and received LSD to do in trials and worked with thousands of people and developed the protocols and the set and setting that really are the basis of much of the work that's done in a therapeutic context here and now. The programs of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and CIIS and other programs, they will acknowledge Stan, and that's great, and yet his, the basic insights that he had about doing therapeutic sessions as an internal space and creating safe set and setting and taking the facilitator out of the medical model and putting the facilitator in the role of simply supporting the inner healing intelligence of the experiencer is really a revolutionary model. It probably brings us back to what our ancestors knew to do, but in terms of shifting the psychology out of a medical model, Stan's work really lays the groundwork for that. This is, Stan was married for many years to Christina Groff. She passed in 2014, and Stan reconnected with Brigitte Groff. You see them there. That's in the house at Esselen, where holotropic breathwork had its birth. And Stan and Brigitte now are developing the training program that I'm part of. So a few of Stan's books, many of you probably know them already, so I'll be brief. Way the Psychonaut is recent, and it's a relief to me that Stan finally feels able to speak publicly more about psychedelics. He, was a leading researcher in Prague and then in Maryland, and then the prohibition sunk in, and he created holotropic breathwork as a means to invite non-ordinary states given the prohibition. But even having listened to him lecture and known him for a number of years, there was always a way that he was holding back from really, going full into his experience as a psychedelic sitter. But with the renaissance that's happening now, Way the Psychonaut is from that perspective. LSD psychotherapy, for those of you who are serious about becoming integration therapists, I highly recommend that book. It's smart, it's easy to read in its own way, and it really deals with the situations that arise in integration in a very comprehensive way. When the Impossible Happens, I recommend that also too. That's the book that most people have fun reading. And in that book is Stan's experience and his stories about basically every psychedelic you can imagine. And he's such a brilliant guy that, when he writes about ketamine or ayahuasca or 5-MeO-DMT in particular, you really have his insights that can capture the experience. And it's useful for people who might not know the particular medicines. And then Psychology of the Future is, an academic book that probably will be used in, many academic programs. So before I get, into the main thrust of my talk, I just wanted to bring to our attention the words that we use. Psychedelics, and many of you know, probably coined by Humphrey Osmond, who was a psychiatrist, had a presence in Los Angeles for many years. From the Greek psyche, mind, and balloon to make visible. Many people prefer entheogen. Who likes entheogen better? No? Yeah. So that which causes God to be known, introduced by Carl Ruck and colleagues. And pathogen, usually used for MDMA and other similar substances, generating a state of empathy. And then some of the older or more colloquial words. We used psychedelics in our book, and I like to use the word psychedelic because for me it includes the shadow, it includes the baggage. Psychedelic conjures up everything that happened with Tim Leary and the counterculture and Nixon and the prohibition and the fear narratives and all of that stuff, which I even get kind of goosebumps thinking about it because it's such a mixture of dark and light and truth and falsehood and all the shadowy things in the human condition. And so that's why one of the reasons I like to use psychedelics, but I'm happy with all the words. Psychedelics, Rick Strassman, who is a great researcher, wrote about the spirit molecule, the God molecule with DMT. This is the more psychological perspective, psychedelics showing us what's on our mind, our subconscious thoughts and feelings that are hidden, covered up, forgotten, out of sight, maybe even completely unexpected, but nevertheless imminently present. And of course, with integration, what we're doing is finding ways to remember these things that come up, finding ways to expand them, to work with them in the different modalities that we have, body, mind, spirit, and then follow these things that come out of our subconscious and bring them into our lives. With entheogen, conjures up the long tradition of humans having used sacred medicines and religious, magical, shamanic journeys, and carries those connotations, and obviously is a fine word in those circumstances. So, I gave you the short version of how I came to be here, but the real reason I'm here is an experience I had in the mid-90s, and I haven't talked publicly about this much, but I'm doing that more. I was working as a lawyer in San Jose, interested in esoteric topics, bouncing around between depression, anxiety, using a lot of alcohol, 3 kids, a job I didn't like, and a colleague at work brought in a friend of hers who had trained as a psychic at the Berkeley Psychic Institute and invited some of us to meet and gather and share energy. It was kind of like Reiki, but informal, where we were feeling each other's energy and sending energy back and forth. And at the end of the session, the woman who was there to work with us, her name was Karen. I didn't know her, but she stood behind me and said, "I'm going to use the Christ energy on Jay." And then whatever happened, I was immediately filled with white light. I was immediately weeping, like flipping a switch. Just unconditional love, forgiveness, knowledge, God, basically. And in a second, everything in my life changed, where I knew that love was a basic energy in the universe, and that it was accessible to us, and that it was a healing force. And I start with that story in part because it did not involve psychedelics. It did not involve intention. Karmically, you could say it was the right time. This is a whole other lecture, but later when I learned astrology, I could see what was going on astrologically that day for me. And interestingly enough, like 17 years later, it was the exact same astrology, and I had the most profound psychedelic experience I've ever had. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I'm confused. She used the Christ energy on me?
That's what she said.
Channel the thing to you?
I don't know what she did. Okay, yeah, but thanks for asking. So, background, Catholic background, religion was toxic for me. It was nothing that I had any particular interest in. But I think she would say that she accessed an energy that she associated with Christ, white light, unconditional love, and somehow channeled that to me. But yeah, so who has had experiences in psychedelics of forgiveness, white light, things of, yeah, so it's not an unusual experience to have with psychedelics. And again, I start because, I like to make the point that psychedelics are a key to open doors, key to open energies, a key to give us access to various realms, powerful keys that I'm grateful for, and I think are part of our heritage and are here now, I think, for a reason, and yet they are not, it's not just the psychedelics that is what's happening, it's our access to universal energies, our access to God, and so it just feels healthier and more real for me to bear in mind the psychedelics are opening something, and I like holding psychedelics as allies, and certainly with ayahuasca and some other medicines, this is a bigger discussion whether we hold those or whether they are actual spirits, with intention and individuality, if you will, and I'm not challenging that by any means. And there's so much that we can unpack in all this area, but just to hold that access to healing energies, access to love, access to source, I strongly believe is a birthright that we have separate from any medicines that we might use. Just a shout out to William James. He was varieties of religious experience. He was probably the first American psychologist, and he treated consciousness as real. His book, Varieties of Religious Experience, talks about white light experiences, talks about these type of experiences. So this is a part of our American psychological history that got buried when we became obsessed with behaviorism and experiments and things of that nature. And transpersonal psychology, in a way, brings back attention to consciousness, and I think really can support the work that we do with psychedelics. Integration of various experiences. I've never talked in this way, but preparing for this evening, I thought to talk through integration in a way, thinking a little bit separately about different types of experiences that we might have with psychedelics. The positive experiences, like what I just mentioned, God, love, creator, unity, nature, helpful beings, healing. And of course, this is all a continuum, and of course we can have experiences of all kinds of nature in any one session. But what we loosely call bad trip experiences, where there's difficulty, anxiety, or fear. What I'm thinking of in terms of experiences with specific insights, understandings about ourselves, others, and the universe. And then the amorphous experiences that might be confusing, not yet understood. And the integration techniques are going to be similar, and yet I think it might be helpful, at least interesting, to think about approaches that bear in mind what type of experience we're integrating.
Question.
Yes, please.
How would you define bridging, and how is bridging and integration, are they the same or are they different?
The word you're using is bridging?
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you define bridging? It's not a word I'm...
It's when you've had an experience, and then when you're not in that space, the psychedelic space, that it doesn't, whether it manifests openly in your life or it doesn't. The more that it does, the more the bridging happens, and that it goes from that space into your everyday life.
Yeah, that's a great word. I've never used that word myself. I talk about that in terms of, I will talk about that in terms of, particularly with the positive experiences of love, unity, God, of finding ways to hold on to those experiences in the body. Right. And the body is very useful for me for that. Right. And I was even going to make a joke that I'm a shy person, I'm nervous to be here, but I've kind of got God right here, so I'm okay. But yeah, it's definitely a technique. Is that something that you try to use, or?
It's, to from my experience, it's something that either happens or it doesn't. And
I see.
I was looking for, shared insight on people's experiences with basically manifested into your full life things that you've discovered, or things that people discover.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, let me keep talking, and then anyone share who has something helpful. So when I think about integration in general, in a really big picture sense, I think of providing context. And here I'm kind of thinking about helping other people with integration as well as our own path of integration. But context is missing for so many people when they begin to have experiences. My sense is that many of you probably have a good deal of context or have community where you have it. But for instance, I spoke to a young man earlier this week who was interested in the Groff work. His late 20s, he had been working pre-COVID in New York City in the fashion and art industry, and a friend invited him to an experience with Bufo Alvarius, 5-MeO-DMT of the toad venom variety. And he went into that and just had a full-blown experience of what he called God, oneness, unity, and then the world didn't make any sense to him. He just said, I'm looking around at these people, I don't know what they're doing, or why they're living like this, or what's going on. And so he, didn't have any context to hold what had happened for him. He went back to where his parents lived in Florida, ordered a lot of books, and God bless him, he ordered Ryan and my book, books by Santa Cristina, and started to develop a context where his experiences could make sense to him and could be held as something that wasn't pathological or strange or weird. And then he similar, to what I did, I went to ITP to integrate. He went into a program in hypnotherapy to integrate his experiences and kind of develop a worldview where he can help other people. So with integration in general, I think of how can we develop a context that supports and makes sense of the experiences that we have. And then techniques, for holding on to the experience, like what I hear you talking about, and carrying forward the experiences and building on them. And then community is so important. I mean, we're here tonight, but finding community of people who are like-minded and like-hearted and can help you with your experiences and normalize them. My sense is that we have folks here who have experience in ayahuasca groups, which have their own community, of course, and some of the perspective that we share in the book and that I have from the academic side is more for working with people who don't have community and lineage to support them. But anyway, community is important. For Ryan and me, with the book, we say many times that integration is a process, not an event, so that we don't hold a psychedelic experience as something that happens on one occasion. Of course, we have an experience, we want to remember it, we want to hold on to it, we want to build on it, but it's a part of our unfolding life. It's a part of, the experiences we have are in relationship to everything that's happened beforehand in our life, probably everything that's happened in past lives, karmically, all of the things before coming together to the experience we have here and then continuing forward. So I like to think of integration as becoming aware of what's happened before, what's happening now, what's happening forward, and bringing it all into one flow and one space. And then integration is following an invitation for healing and transformation. So, I mentioned my integration luxury, going into a doctoral program where we had context, learned about psychological systems, learned about spiritual traditions. We learned techniques, meditation, yoga, breathwork, somatic psychology. We had community. We were encouraged to have individual therapy, and we had opportunities to meet many spiritual and psychological innovators and leaders. I mean, I think probably many in this group living in this area, you have an opportunity to explore many of these modalities, but it's so important with integration to reach out into the different modalities and find what works for you. So with my looking at different types of experiences, integrating positive experiences, and again, this goes to, I think, with what you were asking, encourage ways to hold on to the experience in the body. You know, what I do if I have an experience, you know, if it's powerful in the moment, then I'm not going to take myself out of the experience to go into my head too much, but there's going to be part of me that has an awareness of locking the experience into my body. The body is so important to me, and this is true for me in breathwork as well as psychedelics. And so, almost like with working with dreams, I'll just develop ways to remember the experience, to get back to the experience, and then in the days afterwards, I will try to go back to the experience and have it in my body and practice in meditation, holding on to the pieces that seem to be, you know, helpful for me. And again, developing the context to understand the experience, encourage unfolding of the experience on a path. And then, and this is a big one, probably its own lecture, work with any destabilization, inflation issues in relationship work. So my personal experience and what I've learned from many other people is that with some of the what I can call the God experiences, as I mentioned, the young man I talked to had a period of destabilization, but we can also go into periods of inflation where you know, we might feel ourselves called to save the planet, you know, called to write a book, called to do all these things, and you know that's great, and that's how the world changes, and that's how paradigms shift, and yet you know, to have some awareness of you know, the inflationary aspect that might be there. And for goodness sake, issues in relationship and work. I mean, you know, I was married for many years to a lovely woman who helped me in many ways. We have 3 great children. But that experience that I described was the beginning of the end of our relationship. Because it was, you know, it had, not only did it not have meaning for her, but she felt threatened by it. She thought I was crazy, you know, and I probably was in a lot of ways. You talk about inflation, you're married to the guy, but just to say that these experiences, you know, it can be very helpful to have grounding and to work with somebody who can ground. And I can imagine that there's people here who do that work. And then, yeah, continue to work on personal and relationship issues and encourage the techniques that fit in the community. So Michael Washburn, has anybody heard of Michael Washburn? He was a big force in the early days of transpersonal psychology. Still, you know, an important writer, but he was known for comparing what he called 2 different paths to ego transcendence, which is an interesting concept anyway, but the latter to oneness, where the idea was that you are just climbing up towards God, towards ego transcendence, toward the higher states of consciousness, you know, step by step without needing to really deal with the dirty work, contrasted to what he called spiral to integration, where the positive, exhilarating pieces of God connection are a spiral, and you spiral back through the shadowy material. And obviously, well, I don't know, obviously, but I'm way more oriented towards, it sounds like Paul is as well, towards spiraling back through the material that's there to integrate. So this is a whole another lecture too probably, but sometimes with the ladder to oneness, and people smarter than me have written books about this, but you can get in a place of worrying about spiritual bypass where you're moving up and not really dealing with the things that, and it's sad in a way when that happens, because for me, the positive experiences, the contact with God, with love, forgiveness, is there to give us the ability to deal with the things, with the wounds, with the traumas, and not just of ourselves, but of those in our families, in our communities, and the world. And again, you know, my belief is that psychedelics are here now to help more and more of us be in a position to be ready to face and deal with the shadow that has to emerge and has to be processed if we're going to make it on the planet. Chris Bache, one of my favorite people. Anybody heard of Chris Bache? Anybody read? Good. You read the book? Yeah. So he, good friend of Stan Groff, and is a retired professor of religious studies from a university in Ohio, and he, over a period of 20 years, he did a series of very high-dose LSD sessions. His wife at the time sat for him, and he kept meticulous records of his experiences. He had ways to hold on to and to come back to them. One thing that he would do, and this might be something to think about, is the music tracks that he played during his experiences. About a week later, he would replay the same track and then try to get himself in a space where he had access to the experience, which makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, we don't always have music tracks that we could use, but anything, same with remembering dreams, anything that's going to bring you back to the experience in a way that's not just a mind thing. So Chris, the book, LSD in the Mind and the Universe, it's just it's an astounding book to me. He's a philosopher, so he really went to great lengths to try to articulate what he believes is the way the universe works, to the extent that he could articulate that. And, you know, I resonated with him very deeply for reasons I just kind of said, where he feels that we're at a stage where the trauma of history is ready to be processed and needs to be processed if we're going to move into a place, you know, where we live in sync with nature, where we live in sync with each other. And that's, again, psychedelics are part of that. But in part the reason I have him here after Washburn is I was fortunate to be in a book group with Chris last year of basically psychonauts around the country that somehow were fortunate to be with him, and he offers other experiences in book groups now. But I don't know that this is in his book, but he said it in the group, that, you know, he talked about the interest that people have in their ego death. And I know some really good friends that are just like waiting for their ego to die. You know, it's like, I'm not even sure I understand what that means precisely. Maybe it's that they're hoping to be relieved of their suffering, or they're hoping not to have the stuff that's in their head. And more power to them. I don't mean to be judgmental. But what Chris said resonated with me, that on the subject of ego death, it's not about disappearance of the ego, but increasing permeability of the ego to love, compassion, and God. And so, to me, particularly with the positive experiences that we have, to me, a big piece of integration is the day-to-day work, and it can be a grind, and it's psychological work, and it's relationship work, but it's the work of where do I reach a space where I'm not responding in love? Where do I reach a space where I don't have compassion? Where do I reach a space where I'm reacting in anger? And I'm not talking about not having boundaries, because the more you do this work, I think the better boundaries you have. But the day-to-day work of how am I moving into a place where love is always moving through me, where those experiences that I've had in psychedelics are moving through me on a day-to-day basis. And my partner Rob, who's handling the computer, he's a student and teacher of A Course in Miracles, and that's basically a big piece of their work and their teaching is how do we, on a day-to-day basis, remind ourselves to be in forgiveness for ourselves and for others and compassion. So again, in the big picture, integration to me is about doing all the things, all the work, the psychological work, the spiritual work, so that we can be in the space of carrying love. Sources of context. I've been talking all over this, but where do we get the frameworks that help us? Transpersonal psychology, Groff is important to me. Gabor Mate is a great source for many of you. Jung, somatic work, spiritual systems and technologies. The world mythologies are very useful. Has anyone been in a psychedelics group that's used? Ralph Metzner had a style of doing groups where he would focus on a particular weekend, on a particular world mythology, and then that would become the framework for people to move into their experiences. It's a powerful way of doing the work. Kind of Western, but it's a good method. Psychedelics Renaissance is changing the context, talking about the context from drugs used by hippies in the 60s to legitimate tool for treatment of PTSD, depression, anxiety. Still there are, so I'm talking about this because when we're thinking about the context that we're going to help people move into and understand the whole experiences, or the context that we're going to use, and I teach a course for Pacifica University that goes into all of this in great depth. But what paradigm are we aligned with? What paradigm are we resisting? What are the paradigms acting out all around us in the Renaissance? With the medical model, and Rick Doblin, who you guys probably know is head of MAPS, has said, he probably says it publicly, but he said it in something that I heard, where psychedelics came in the 60s in the counterculture, but really, I think, and Rick more than probably anybody is a kind of author of this, but bringing it in through the medical model. So, but the issue to think about and integrate is how do psychedelics work in the medical model when we're used to pharmaceuticals, where their medical model doesn't integrate, and so just be aware of the people that you work with who are going to be hearing about, how great, MDMA or psilocybin or whatever is to solve this particular problem, and, maybe help them to contextualize that the medical model is the way that this is coming in now, and yet do we need more to be able to understand, where we're coming from, to be able to integrate. And some of the underground therapists that I most respect are just, and you probably know these folks too, are just really troubled by the possibility that psychedelics are going to be institutionalized in a medical model. And so that's another thing for us to, I talk about it integrating, just integrate how you feel about that. And of course the shamanic models are, so now I have a section where I want to talk about human history with sacred medicines. This is context. This is from Stan. The Western industrial civilization is the only group in the entire human history that doesn't hold non-Aryan states in great esteem and doesn't have any use for them, actually has pathologized them every other culture has spent a lot of time and energy trying to discover ways to inducing non-ordinary states. And, I think it has really helped me in integrating my experiences. It's helped me in talking with others to help people realize that it hasn't always been this way, that our heritage has evolved using sacred medicines, and what have we used them for? To connect with wise and powerful realms, to cure illnesses in individuals and groups, to restore communities to alignment with deities and with nature, to understand and find solutions to challenges, to celebrate and enjoy life through sacred connection. And all of those goals involve integration. Etymologists believe the word religion comes from the Latin religare, meaning to reconnect or rebind. So when we're thinking about the healing of the planet, of humanity, of our community, of our culture, or whatever, and then I think of integration as we're opening to source, we're getting insights, we're changing ourselves, we're finding ways to embody love and forgiveness and understanding, and that itself is integrating itself into the communities and changing the communities. This is something from the book, and it's one of my favorite things that I wrote in the book. Current use of psychedelics by hundreds of thousands of people is a brave standing with our ancestors during a dangerous growing spurt in human history. The upshot of the dangerous growing spurt is that we have fallen out of balance with nature and have lost any sense of the sacred. Many of us are remembering that psychedelics were a sacred tool used by our ancestors when the human tribe was in trouble. Does anyone else feel like that? Like that's what we're... Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Yeah. Did somebody want to say something?
No.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, some of you might know this, but it's helpful to me to know just some of the history that's coming forward now about our ancestors and non-ordinary states and psychedelics in particular, and using psychedelic word is kind of weird. But Göbekli Tepe, who's heard of this? Yeah. So it's a site in Anatolia in modern Turkey, 12,000 years old, and it was a temple, and it has revolutionized the way that some anthropologists think about human history, in the sense that before it was assumed, and it's a very materialistic, non-spiritual perspective, but it was assumed in anthropology that people came together in cities, and then religion developed as a way of dealing with the relationship of people in cities and the power structures, and that the kingly power structure was projected into heaven with a god. And so the idea was that spirituality was a projection of human activity, whereas what's thought with this is that humans came together originally at a time when we were nomads, and came together in order to experience non-ordinary states, in order to worship, in order to have ritual. So that, to me, it gives me goosebumps to think that civilization started because we wanted to come together to have ritual, to experience non-ordinary states, to worship and to pray, and to get back to thinking that this is part of us, and we can return to it. Great books coming out. Well, this is an older book, The Road to Eleusis. So the idea is that the Eleusinian mysteries, we know what those were 2,000 years outside of Athens. All the big people, Plato, Socrates, the supposed founders of Western civilization, had these experiences, which Gordon Wasson, who of course was the guy who brought mushrooms to the West and kind of did damage to Maria Sabina. Albert Hoffman, discoverer of LSD, and Carl Ruck, who's an academic and is the guy who we mentioned in terms of entheogen as a word. But the idea was that they believed that the Eleusinian mysteries were based on people drinking a beer that was essentially a form of LSD, an ergot. And this idea is carried forward. Do people know this book, Brian Muraresca? Great book. The idea is that the secret history of the religion with no name, that before the power structures that got into Christianity settled into the world, that religion was a matter of experience, of direct experience of God, which of course we get back to with psychedelics. And so in a very comprehensive and readable way, he makes the point again that it's our heritage to connect directly with God, and that very likely we use medicines to get into non-ordinary states to do it. One of his main points too is that women were usually the leaders in these religions, whatever words you want to use, priestess, etc. And again, the way that patriarchy and the way that Christianity settled into a dominant structure with the nation states. And again, I think it's hopeful, and people, coming into psychedelics, coming into trying to release themselves from the hold that Western culture has on us, it can help them to understand that we've been in other places and we're getting back to them. Integrating culture and history, grieving loss of the sacred. Paul mentioned the other book I wrote, which I would like to have titled Grieving for Nature, Grieving for Self. But I spent so many non-ordinary state sessions, breathwork, psychedelics, just weeping, for the loss of sacred in the culture. Some of it was personal, that I had to do this on my own. I had to figure it out on my own. Grieving the loss of nature. I think there'll be more and more of that. People have these experiences in psychedelics? Yeah. I think it's right here, and I think it's an entry point for healing. Joanna Macy did this work years ago, but to get into the space where you can feel the loss of nature and then begin to feel being in nature again, and to integrate that space and be able to share it. Again, remembering the old ways, try to avoid romanticizing too much, because I think, we had a lot of violence in our history, but we'll try to process all that. Imagining a way forward, finding ways to talk about experience, finding community, and learning history. So integrating bad trips. I say that kind of in jest. Who's had difficult experiences in psychedelics? Yeah. It's all part of it, huh? So, information from a global drug survey suggests that between 15 and 40% of people who've used LSD or mushrooms report at least one bad experience. Roland Griffiths, who's a big deal even now at Johns Hopkins on the modern research, did a survey with 2,000 people about the single worst bad trip experience. This is so interesting to me. 62% said the bad trip was one of the most difficult psychological experiences of their lives. 11% said it was the most difficult experience, but 34% reported the bad trip was in the top 5 of their most personally meaningful experiences, with 31% saying it was among the top 5 of the most spiritually significant experiences of their lives. 76% said the bad trip in the end increased their sense of well-being and overall life satisfaction. 46% were willing to experience the bad trip all over again. Do people feel like that about their tough experiences? No? Yeah. So, Ralph Metzner suggested that bad trips are more likely with high dose and external input. Stan would say that, and he might be a little unrealistic here, but that, if you're careful with setting, if you have blinds on, if you have proper support, that it's unlikely that you'll have quote unquote a bad trip. And yet his literature, particularly LSD psychotherapy, is full of reports of working with people who have difficult experiences. Yes.
At the UCLA Psychedelic Symposium,
Yeah.
they suggested using the term unpleasant trip. They said there is no bad trip, and that made a lot of sense to me. The word bad
seems to have such a pejorative connotation.
I hear you. And you remember what I said about why I like to use the word psychedelic? I like to use bad trip because of that very reason, that it brings up, the difficulty. But I hear you. I understand. It's a choice I made, almost tongue in cheek a little bit. That's why it's in quotes. But again, and no disrespect to what they did or what your view might be, but unpleasant to me in a way just kind of minimizes the impact of what happened, and I don't necessarily want to do that. Sir?
I totally agree with that. It says right there, maybe one of the most difficult psychological experiences of their life. I read another study once that said people said it was among the five most difficult psychological experiences of their life. I don't know what the other four were, but I don't think people are running up to tell them that wasn't bad. We feel that we can do that with psychedelics. I don't know why. I think it's because we're protective of them.
Yeah.
And we're sort of cheerleaders and boosters for them.
Yeah.
There's a reason those things are difficult. They're incomplete experiences. They're bad things that happen in our lives that we didn't face at the time, like the death of someone or the loss of something or some kind of assault. So I don't agree with saying there's no such thing as a bad trip. I think that minimizes the experience, and I think that intimidates people.
Yeah, and other people would have different views. I would also say this is a longer thing, and when I talk about integration, I like to think about and integrate all the things that are in this. UCLA stuff and the modern studies, they're talking to the FDA. They're talking to the mainstream. They're talking to the media, and so they have in mind that they don't want to scare the public. They want to bring people in, and so that's part of what's happening, with them. And I understand, I respect that, but I'm talking to a different crowd.
I believe in informed consent. You don't scare someone away. You don't scare someone away from a traffic accident by telling them to wear a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Someone should know what the possibilities are, and they should know that things might get bad for them. And one of the reasons that bad trips happen is because of sayings like that. And then when things start getting difficult, people think something's wrong, I'm having a bad trip. Instead of, this is an experience, I'm supposed to feel this. This is the inner healer working.
Yeah.
This is that bad experience, it's processing, so it doesn't haunt me anymore. So I don't agree with that either. I know that that's why people do it.
Yeah.
They don't want to scare people away, but people who are scared of this shouldn't be doing psychedelics.
Yeah, it's complicated. No, I deeply respect and I really resonate with what you're saying. And, I think the world will be a better place if MDMA comes in legally in clinics, if psilocybin can be used in hospitals with people that are dying and their families and all those things. And for those things to happen, we need to be careful with the people who don't understand these things and yet have power. And so, I don't have a problem with the languaging if they need to be careful with that. And Rick Donald's the master of that, among other things.
I can understand being careful, but I have a problem when it comes to people telling other people there's no such thing as a bad trip. I've seen people tell people that face to face. That's just not right.
Well,
one of the things psychedelics teaches is that you take the bad with the good.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it can be, again, we'll move on, but it can be crazy making if somehow the suffering involved with something bad is denied and you're feeling like you're told that you can't be in that place of the suffering. And that's, anyway, thank you for this discussion. I appreciate it. All right. So, back on bad trips, you were seeking the pearls of golden energy essence, guarded by the dragon. That dragon's name is pain, fear, threat, scream. Speak softly to that dragon, or sing to him soothingly, like Orpheus. And then you may take the precious pearls from his frightful, flaming jaws. It's kind of weird. what we're saying. So that's honest to Ralph. I didn't know Ralph personally. I know many people who worked with him closely and loved him. And he was, do people know Ralph and his work? I highly recommend checking out his books. They're going to be reprinted soon. And he led underground groups for years and was one of the original guys back in the day with Tim Leary and Ram Dass and Richard Alpert. Factors influencing psychedelic experience. This is something Ryan and I came up with based on having been around. But for thinking about through with integration, we in the book talk about integration starting before your experience, when you bring to mind the different things that you're bringing there and begin to unpack them and understand them, and then what you've been working with is carried forward not into the experience, not just into the experience, but also later. So these are obvious in many respects. Substance and doses can influence experience. Mindset, what Stan calls set, what's on your mind before, during, and after. Setting, the location, surroundings, and people. Intention, the conscious or perhaps unconscious goal you're bringing. Your inner healing intelligence. Universal archetypal astrological energies impacting you at the time of your journey, which is a whole other subject and area of inquiry. And then I actually added 7 recently. It's not in the book because I was becoming more and more aware in my own work and talking with people about just the will that one can develop to navigate intentionally within the psychedelic experiences. For me, and this is certainly Stan's work as well, the surrender is the most important thing, and yet within the surrender, I think there's a way of having an intentionality to really go into the experience and navigate through it. And so these things, then impact, whether the trip is good, bad, unpleasant, healing, whatever. So this is my friend Ren Butler. Who do people know about working with astrology and psychedelics? Is this a new topic? Okay. So Ren's, and this comes out of Stan's work and Stan's work with Rick Tarnas, who's the brilliant man, cultural historian, author of Psyche and Cosmos. Ren's book, Pathways to Wholeness, articulates, it's a complicated area, astrology, but the basic idea when we're born, the planets are in a certain configuration, and that has an imprint on us, and then as time goes on, the planets move, and where they are in relation to where they were when we were born has an influence energetically on us. And it's not just like, Stan had a famous argument with Carl Sagan about this. It's not saying that the planet Pluto is exerting gravitational pull, but rather that the planets are an archetypal reflection of universal forces that are in an archetypal or energetic realm. But once I learned this stuff, it's astoundingly informative and accurate. So Ren's book talks about the different planetary configurations and the influence that they might have on you in a non-early state experience if the particular configurations are active on a certain day. And as I suggested before, the 2 most powerful spiritual experiences I had, one, the white light that I described, and then an experience with Bufo in Europe with the exact same astrological configuration, like 17 years later. And so, it's an area of study, and then in terms of integration, and Ryan does this. I used to do charts for my friend Ryan for his clients. If you're integrating an experience, it could be helpful to look at what the archetypes were that were influential on the particular day that you had the experience, because it becomes an avenue to go into, to consider and reflect on. So integrating difficult experiences, those experiences of dissociation, fear, panic, paranoia, anxiety, the Zendo Project guidelines. People know the Zendo Project, Burning Man, and the effort to help people if they are, troubled with an experience. The method, and this is in the moment with folks, to have a safe place, talk them through it, not down. You're sitting, not guiding, and difficulty is not bad. But, if we're working as an integration therapist or working with ourselves, the difficult experiences, are sort of, for me, starting at an opposite end than if you're working with the God experiences and then seeing what they illuminate and finding the trauma that's there to heal. With the difficult experience, you're invited to have access to the emotions that then might lead you to the biographical or karmic or whatever traumas that are there. So it's a more direct access to the traumatic material that might be there to unpack and integrate. Obviously, you need to be very, if you're working in a therapeutic role, be very, very careful not to re-traumatize. You want to explore the possible connections, essential not to pathologize. And the little bit I know about compassionate inquiry, I think it's designed to work in this space.
Very much so.
Yeah. That's Gabor Mate's model. So, sorry, one back. So what I would call insight experiences, this is my favorite piece of psychedelic work, and breathwork works like this for me too. I'll just have out of nowhere an insight about myself, about someone else, about life, world, any issue, and it doesn't necessarily feel, connected to the life narrative I have, but it's just something that appears where suddenly I understand something. In my first ayahuasca experience years ago, it was all about how I kind of knew this intellectually from studying psychology, but how everything was projection, coming out of me or defense withholding something, and that's what created my life. I was laughing hysterically, but just to, when you have these insights, that feel real and are real, and then, if you're working with that in integration, just really love them, and go with them and find them and expand them, write about them, make art, movement, travel, follow the synchronicities. It leads to transformational self, family, relationship, and community. And really, that ayahuasca experience is how this book began, because I started writing about it, and then it just got bigger and bigger, and then Ryan got involved. So then the amorphous or confusing experiences, who's had experiences where you kind of didn't even know what was happening? Yeah. Whether you can't hold on to it or what is it. As in dream work, I think the integration here is to consider different channels that might help get an understanding or a way to hold onto the experience. Arnie and Amy Mindell, who were great leaders of group process and world work, whatever, but they would talk about switching channels from thought to emotion to body sensation, and that the means of switching from one channel to another sometimes can help you find meaning or understanding of something that, I forget what they called it, but the things that are like on the edge of coming into consciousness or awareness, but they're not there yet. Right brain activities are often more fruitful for this. In breath work, right after a session, we encourage people to draw what we call a mandala, where you take art materials and you draw in a circle so that you bring forward what happened in a creative way without making it a thought thing. And then the experience of nothing happened, which is really more likely in breath work than psychedelics, I think, but still, still happens. And so, there's a guy that I became friends with who, the reason he trained as a breathwork facilitator over a period of years was one thing that happened. First time he tried breathwork, nothing happened for him, and he was miserable about it. And then a facilitator, it might have actually been Stan, talked to him about the experience and said to him, well, does this feeling of nothing happening remind you of anything? And then he just burst into tears and understood that that's a place that he exists in. And so then that allowed the unpacking of addiction. I wanted to leave time for questions, and we're getting to the end, but this is close. Anyway, this is a big topic. We've got a whole chapter in the book. You guys probably know the clinics that are arising in Europe and elsewhere dealing, particularly with ibogaine. The miracle of some psychedelics with addiction is can leave you in a place, and I experienced this as well. Where it's a sense of not wanting the thing that I'm attached to more than the struggle of I can manage not to do it, which is such a blessing and a gift when it can happen. Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, actually had positive experiences with psychedelics, and then the board basically voted not to talk about that anymore, which is fine. I mean, I get it, where you need to stay clear of substance. Christina Groff's great book, The Thirst for Wholeness, Attachment Addiction, The Spiritual Path, makes clear, in her experience and mine as well, that the thirst for alcohol or substance at its base does feel like a search for God that's not able to reach fruition, and framing it that way is helpful. And so, working in integration with people dealing with substance issues, it helps to have this knowledge and this framework. The other thing, back to astrology, is that the Neptune archetype, planetary Neptune, is the god essentially of non-ordinary states and also of substance abuse. So that those of us, like I have a lot of Neptune in my chart. It's like connected to all the main things. It's in the first house. And so whatever it is that's bringing me to God is also making me like to have a drink. So it's, it's the same energy, and understanding it, that way can be helpful. It also can be helpful, and this is a bigger discussion, but not to, to be mindful of sometimes when we're chasing the highs of psychedelics. I mean, people catch themselves in that when they're looking for a high, and that's fine, and to be understanding of it. What do we got? Well, I think we got a couple more questions. Let's go to the last two quick. Death and dying. I love Stan's quote down at the bottom. There's no fundamental difference between the preparation for death and the practice of dying and spiritual practice leading to enlightenment. Because the way that I understand that is that spiritual practice leading to enlightenment is releasing attachment to one thing after another, and preparing for death is releasing attachment to the body and the life story. And
what is the preparation for death versus the practice of dying? Like, what are the two? How are they different?
I never thought about that. What do you think?
Some of us don't get to prepare. We're just walking the street and then bam. So we're looking maybe if we do get to prepare and then the actual moment.
Yeah, he probably, these are his words. He was probably thinking in terms of, because he did work when he was a researcher in Maryland, worked with cancer patients, mostly people preparing for death. And so he was probably thinking of working with people when they know that their time is limited and they're coming to peace with that, versus the practice of dying.
What is the practice of dying?
Diane Haug, who's my co-director with me of Growth Legacy Project, she worked for years with people dying, and so the intentional practice of being with people as they're nearing their transition and helping them stay mindful, helping them stay present, helping them stay conscious. And this is way above my pay grade and stuff. but I think the Tibetans have practices for staying conscious. Anyway. Yeah, this is a shout out for breathwork. We do have programs coming up. And then
This is the next class.
Yeah, I meant to, I goofed up, but if you can get back to like the second slide, the own tarot slide.
Oh.
Does anybody have questions or showing?
I do.
Yeah, hey.
I don't need a microphone. I can project. Stop kidding.
I had a question regarding the Metzger.
Ralph Metzner?
Okay, Metzner.
Yeah.
When you said the world mythologies, what are some examples?
Great question. I have the good fortune to be going later this month to a weekend medicine gathering led by someone who carries Ralph's lineage. And that gathering is going to focus on what's called the Well of Remembrance, which comes from Norse mythology. And so with, Odin, it's weird now because Odin actually, I live in Montana partly, and some of the right-wing people are talking about Odin as a war god, and so it's coming back up that way. But in a healthier sense, Odin was a seeker. He's the guy who hung himself upside down from a tree, which is like the hangman card in Thoreau, if you know it, but where he surrendered everything of himself, and he sacrificed one of his eyes in order to seek wisdom and knowledge. And then Freya is, in the Norse system, the feminine god of procreation and mothering. And so what the guide will do, she'll frame the mythology for us before we do the medicine work. And then during the medicine, she will invite us, and some people don't like this method at all, but she will invite us, through narrative, to approach the Well of Remembrance and to ask Freya for information. And so that the Norse, the different systems in those Egyptian mythology, the Sumerian, the Native American, all the different systems can provide frameworks and then even guidance for trying to have context and make sense of particular.
So it's not that they have to believe in it, but it's a practice for that weekend, and if they choose to experience it that way. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in all of it, so it's.
Yeah, just the freedom to choose.
Yeah.
Because some people can be very turned off by that.
Oh yeah.
And it could hinder possible experiences, right? So it's giving the allowance to have space to say yes or no, or.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and that's why I said it can be controversial. Absolutely, that any of these systems can be triggering for any number of reasons, and yeah, you want to be careful with that and choose wisely. Yeah. Other thoughts or?
Yeah, I'm curious about what you said about astrology, and the right side of my brain really likes that idea, and the left side of my brain is thinking, has anyone done any empirical study on this? Because we kind of know when we have bad trips and good trips, and if it could be studied empirically, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, one of my personal intentions is to develop a database to do that. I had the good fortune to be with Stan and Brigitte at Esalen in June of 2019. Stan's going to be 91 this year, so he was like 89 then, and he'd had a stroke, and so his language was limited. But the last thing he said to a gathering of 80 people was, please, you write about your non-ordinary state experiences and begin sending them to us so that we can develop a database, and keep track of the dates, that things happen, so that we can begin to do this. And I've, in my own mind, written protocols for how to do this. And maybe it won't go anywhere, but I think it's definitely worth investigating. Yeah, does that?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And one other question: can you give me an example in Greek mythology for the type of work that you mentioned for world mythology?
Greek, well, I'm not expert in the Greek, but I mean, does anybody know Greek mythology? How would you develop a system where you, probably you would look for a particular, myth. Probably Persephone being taken down, through the plundering and the rape, and her mother grieving and coming back up. So usually when these systems are used, it's to suggest a way to hold and remember, the way that some humans have held a journey, and so it would be, guided through what is it like to be taken down against your will. I mean, and then, heck, I don't want to tell anybody what to do, but you could maybe get access to what is it like to have, what I'm calling a bad trip experience. If you're taking someplace, you didn't expect to go or want to go, and how does that feel? And then if you broaden the experience, mythologically, and then, just imagining, particularly if I was in medicine, then I might be relating to all the people who have been, kidnapped or done, and the people suffering war now. And anyway, so that the mythology then somehow, in an archetypal sense, maybe assists entering into some of these spaces.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sir.
Yeah, I wonder if you just would like to talk a little bit about the idea of enlightenment and personal growth, and how, because in a lot of ways you're talking about a process of us all growing, of us all reconnecting to the divine, to God, to the universe, however you want to define it.
Yeah.
And so that there's this process over time of us growing and developing and dropping the things that are not serving us. As we connect more to the source, to the divine, to our true nature. And so there's a lot going through what you're saying about this process of kind of enlightenment that we're all kind of going through in some way or another. So what if you could just sort of elaborate on that a little bit? And
I think you did a beautiful job just now. But, yeah, I personally, the word enlightenment sometimes scares me off a little bit, because for me it suggests an endpoint that, is probably not something I'm going to reach, and then the attachment to reaching the endpoint then can become a thing into itself. But I know that's not what you're asking.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, but what you're, and again, the Chris Bache example has the most meaning to me. That, and again, my work with my partner Rob on a daily basis. When he will know that I'm triggered, and then he will invite me, to remember why I'm being triggered, and can I release that, then it can be back into a loving space. And there are people smarter than me, Ken Wilber, have written a lot about this, whether you ever really, get to a steady state where you're holding all these, where you're holding an enlightened state. I mean, probably in meditation, people do, and this is not to say I don't think they're enlightened people, because I believe there really are. I mean, one of the experiences I had at ITP is that there was a woman from India who was a spiritual teacher, and she walked down the aisle to give a lecture, and as she walked past, people right and left were bursting into tears, because she, through her work, was in an energetic space where her, she's given darshan to just right and left from people walking by. So maybe the word enlightened would be used for her, because she reached an energetic space where she was, just love and able to transmit it. God bless her. She had to have people carry her, carry her in, because she could hardly walk. So I think this happens in our culture. I don't know that you see it, a lot of it. I think you see more striving for it. But it's a lot, and that's why I appreciate Paul's perspective and the work of, just the day-to-day, shadow work of when am I being a jerk? When am I not responding in love? Or when am I giving myself too much? If you're looking at it from the boundaries in the day-to-day space, so that, more and more you're in this place where, you can be a force of love for yourself and your family and your community. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Hey, yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, so in community and sharing circles specifically in, ceremony, wondering about like the implanting of other people's stories in my own mind, and then, do I have a repressed memory, or am I almost manifesting this other person's, story is sort of like made a seedling in my own brain, and then almost being confused as to what is mine and not. And also while honoring, I've had deep experiences where it's our pain, our suffering, what they went through is mine. And like I've had that too, and maybe that's the answer, or maybe it's just faith in the medicine will show you, it always gives you what you need. But if you could just comment on that, because I had a recent experience where I'm sort of going through that right now. Like, am I creating this because I heard it? If you have any thoughts, yeah.
Again, I think you said it. I mean, I share those experiences. I mean, this is maybe not directly responsive, but there are techniques to energetic techniques or spiritual techniques to surround yourself, with images and with energy, to make sure that you're not taking on other people's stuff when you don't want to. That's set up in many ayahuasca circles where everybody
It was
some where it is all shared pain, or where somebody is able to take somebody else's piece of suffering and then purge it, and then that releases everything else. So the share of it, but yeah, I just think all I can say is just try to do your own work, and maybe have an intention to hold on to yourself and not be drawn too much, or to work with the story. I mean, back in psychology school, they, when we were working with group process, and everybody's saying that's your projection, that's your projection. We're always encouraged to lean into it, And so, if it were your story, where does that take you, And yet, if it feels intrusive, then I would even, maybe just an intention or a practice, or even your own little ritual to release that and give it back to the source that it came from.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Any, yes, ma'am. No. Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Okay.
I just wanted to give space to something that's mentioned at the beginning, and wanted to give people a chance to say stuff about it too.
Sure, please.
Of the, sometimes I feel like the enlightenment is extractive, that we're all just very selfish, hungry egos looking to, be enlightened. And this is something most people go through with psychedelics as part of the journey. I know it's not the only thing. But I think the reason I come to these events is because of the exciting prohibition moment, that we're in. But the exciting moment that we're doing it for others, and for others, and not just for ourselves. And so I wanted to give that space to talk about that, where an article that just came out that I wanted to direct everybody is called "The Coming of the Psychedelic Industrial Complex" by Roberto Lovato. And you can find it on Alta online. And it was just a week ago. It's very fresh. He's mostly from the Bay Area, but it's the Coming Psychedelic Industrial Complex. It's very good for calling in and calling out the kind of monoculture of psychedelia, and the sacredness that's been extracted and things like that. A lot of people are talking about it. It's exciting. I just wanted to give space for that in the conversation too.
Yeah, if anyone wants to take that, I appreciate that. The courses I teach, like particularly in Pacifica, we dealt a lot with the. Were you in that course?
I'm a grad. No.
Okay. Yeah, this was in the retreat program, and I'll do it again next fall. But the way the Renaissance and the corporate culture and the buzz with the money and extraction and all of that, and then the cultural appropriation, which is really can be shadowy and ugly, but all those things, and those are I can talk about it in terms of integration too, but yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like. I mean, how would you say that? I mean, would it be like in terms of a prayer almost that we can withstand?
No, I think it's more about acknowledging that they're things.
Yeah.
I think it's right now we're in the moment we're acknowledging that there are actual organizations and collectives that are more focused on that than just coming up with the right thing to say. Like there's an organization called Chacruna, I think, or Chacuna in the Bay Area. And it's just, I just want to get into them. I want to check them out. I'm hoping that, there are some organizations that come up to train therapists, like I'm a therapist, and it just, I went through the whole talk of the interview and I filled out the thing and I had an interview and then I finally found out how much it was going to cost and things like that. But I did the work in that. So I think it's important that I'm not just bagging at all. But what I'm saying is, so there are actual places that are not just venture capital money that's going to disappear or it's going to transform into something being bought, and that we're not training young Pacifica grads to just work in this space. Like we're healers, the healers not just trying to work in this space. I don't know, I see that veering off, and so I'm kind of trying to be an elder in that a little bit and kind of. Yeah, I'm not in no way a psychedelic therapist right now, but it's bringing me back into my own journey as a healed one, a person in healing, and not trying to be a healer. I'm not trying to be a therapist so much as I thought I was going to be.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just talking. I'm not asking a question.
Okay, we're at 9:40. I know people might be wanting to wind up. I'm happy to.
Yeah, we can take one more question if you want.
I just wanted to, we often with integration we talk about, encouraging more integration, and one of the things I wonder about is almost like I think of over-integrating, if you can swing too far the other direction, where you, it's a little like what you said, chasing the high, but without actually using medicine. You're just, like you said, that idea of, let's say you're reviving in your mind kind of what was that body experience I had, and you're kind of bringing it to life for yourself. Whether that can, so I guess if you can comment on that and the possibility of swinging too far either way.
Yeah, well, that's a great thought. I mean, it's a great question. When I was in grad school, Jim Fadiman, who I really liked and liked to work with, he just told me once, you could find meaning in anything, and it was not a compliment. It was like, dude, just give it a rest, and so. But this is kind of what I like to do. But absolutely, and I mean, sometimes going to a psychedelic session, particularly in community, just to celebrate the sacred nature of life and being together, and not having to dig for anything or figure anything out. So I really appreciate that. And the other side would be, if you're just think about whether you're bypassing, and then thinking about whether you're chasing a high or something. But yeah, for sure, like being overly serious about everything and not just enjoying the moment and enjoying the thrill and the gift of being alive.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, it's something I feel like for me, from my past, there was more of an experience like that, but it's something I've navigated over time, where I used to over-integrate, and now it's more let it play itself out,
Yeah, for sure. Like they say about dreams, if you don't figure out this dream, there's going to be another one. And same with lifetime. If you don't get it right this lifetime, there'll probably be another one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect way to end. So do people know the Tara mantra? Anyway, so speaking of integration, you know, Chris Beisch advises that if you get, you know, to particular places in psychedelic work, particularly if you've been doing a lot of it and going very deeply, that it's almost necessary to have a spiritual practice to integrate, because what's being integrated is at levels, you know, of consciousness or archetypal levels that are almost beyond thought, and this involve energetic relationships, and that the lineages that have developed chants and practices have laid down for us forms that we can follow that can help us integrate, you know, and learn and stay safe. And this is one, and Rob and I have practiced this sometimes. Do people want to say this a couple of times? Is that okay? So we'll do it 3 times, and then we'll say goodnight. Take a deep breath first. Om Tara Tutara Ture Soha. Om Tara Tutare Ture Soha. Om Tara Tutare Ture Soha. Om Tara Tutare Ture Soha. Soha. Om Tara Tutare Ture 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 Soha. Soha. One more time. Om Tara Tutare Ture Soha. 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 Soha. And so it is. Thank you. It's an honor to be with you.